using cuttings and finding willows on your own property is something that individual landowners can do. Go out, find these willows on your property, take cuttings from them, and install them yourselves to have your own sense of, hey, I've improved my stream health by replanting that vegetation. So the willow, as you're walking along, you're walking down the stream bank and you see this plant that has these really long bladed leaves here. They come off the stem on opposite directions. So as you're coming up the stem, there's one going off to the left, and then one goes off to the right, and then one goes off to the left. So they're oppositely, the leaves are opposite to each other. They have these long bladed leaves on them. Generally, if you flip the leaf over, the bottom side of the leaf is a different color than the top. And also, as you're going, when you find willows on your property, the majority of them don't have leaves down close to the base. And so that's one real good way to distinguish it among a bunch of the other material that's growing along stream banks, where they will have leaves all the way down to the base. The willows do not. The willows will only have leaves out at the end of the stem because they're really trying to maximize the amount of sunlight that they're using. So I'd like to go into, if I could, an explanation on how an individual landowner can go, once they've identified willows on their property, can go take cuttings on them and install them into their own property. And so the time of year that you do this is really important. And so whenever a willow has leaves on it, it's not dormant. And so the best time to do any sort of live staking cuttings is when these plants become dormant. So in the fall, generally around here, it's the last week in October, these plants will lose all their leaves. Once they've lost their leaves, we can assume they've gone dormant. They've put all their reserves back into the roots. There's no more leaves on the plant, so if we go cutting it, we're not going to have undue stress to the plant that's going to cause it to die. So the way that I go about making a willow stake is I will find these nice big fat stems down here. I like to use my thumb as an indicator of the thickness, that I don't want to get anything smaller than that. For one, it's really hard to pound that thing into the ground because it's going to want to be all wonky, and two, it doesn't have enough reserves stored up in that bark to be able to put out roots. So I go for stems that are minimally the size of my thumb and as big as 2 to 2.5 inches in diameter. Any bigger than that and it's really old material. So I'll take a cutting right down at the base. I don't want to take any more than 2/3 of any individual plant because I don't want to stress that plant. So I'll take a cutting down at the base with a pair of loppers, nice sharp pair of loppers, and then I take off all the branches along that main stem with that pair of loppers. Now I have myself a really long stick. On that stick, I cut it into 18 to 24 inch sections. I also remember which way this thing was growing up. If I put a willow stake in upside down, it's not going to grow. So I remember where the base of the plant was and where the top of the plant was. Starting at the base of the plant, I make an angled cut on the bottom of the willow stake, on the bottom of the branch, move up 18 inches and make a horizontal cut. So now I have a nice flat part on the top that I can hammer on, and I have an angled wedge on the bottom that will act like a tent stake and help me to get it into the ground. I put those things into the ground. If I have a 24-inch stake, I'll put it into the ground at least 18 inches. I want to make sure that at the top above the ground surface that I have some leaf nodes. On a willow branch, there are these bumps. The closer you get to the edge of the branch, the more bumps they are. But these bumps are where the willow is going to start to put out when you hammer it into the ground. These are where the stems and the leaves are going to grow from. So when I stick this into the ground, I hammer it so that there's at least 4 of these bumps exposed above the surface. That will ensure that I have at least 4 branches growing to capture the sunlight to help to put out some roots on this willow. So those leaf nodes are really important, and they're just bumps, and it's really simple. The willow bark is really smooth except for where there's a leaf node. And so when you're feeling along the stem, you can feel those bumps at bump outs, and you just want to make sure that there's at least 4 of those above the ground surface. If you leave too much exposed above the ground surface, then all of a sudden we have a problem with that material drying out. And so we want to be careful that we get it low enough into the ground so there's only 4 to 6 of those bud scars, leaf scars showing, so that we're not experiencing too much above ground that's just going to dry out because it doesn't have the ability or the roots to transport water up to the top of that stake. So that's pretty much it. You know, taking live cuttings is really quite simple to do. Anybody can do it with a nice sharp pair of loppers. It doesn't take much effort. And if there's ever a question as far as identifying willows on your property, we're always available at the Stream Management Program to come out and walk your property with you and help you figure out what is growing on your property and whether or not any of that material can be used for cutting material to get vegetation reestablished on your bank. The cool thing with the live staking is that it's a pretty cheap alternative. If you were to go buy these willows, you know, these are only 4 or 5 years old, but if you were to go to a nursery and try to purchase them, they'd be $30 to $40 a piece, where you can go out in your yard and just cut a stake off, put it in the ground, and in 5 years, it's as large as anything you would have bought in the nursery trade.